Welcome to Microsoft Excel, Getting Started with PivotTables. I'm Jason Bursack, a productivity trainer for IT Showcase at Microsoft. PivotTables can help you sort and categorize worksheet data so you can analyze details, spot patterns, and make informed decisions. They're a great way to summarize and present data for analysis and review. Today, I'll show you how to create a pivot table from scratch, format your table, build charts, filter your data, and more. What we'll cover today is pivot table creation, layout and formatting, filtering of pivot tables, pivot charts, and we'll have tips and tricks scattered throughout the presentation. We'll also do a substantial demo. So what exactly do pivot tables do? Pivot tables are great if you want to sort and categorize a large amount of data. Now, you don't have to have a large amount of data for pivot tables, but a lot of times when people make pivot tables, they do have quite a bit of data. You can do things like total and summarize your data. You can calculate. You can expand and collapse areas of the table. So we'll start with creating pivot tables. Now, in order to create a pivot table from scratch, you'll take your data in Excel. And you don't need to highlight manually all of the data. I've seen people try to do this. Now, you did have to do this like way back in Excel 2003. But right now, all you have to do is click on a cell. And when you go to your Insert tab and select Pivot Table, Excel will expand out the selection until it reaches a row or column of space. And it'll ask you, is this the data you want? And it usually is. Now, in the rare circumstance that you're manipulating a table that has rows and columns of spaces, this is the one time where you'll actually have to manually select all your data, but that doesn't happen very often. You'll be shown a wizard here. And on the wizard, it will ask you to confirm the data selection. It'll then ask you if you want your table to be put in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. I generally recommend that you choose a new worksheet unless you have a good reason for choosing existing worksheet. There's some other options on there that we won't be covering in this basic course. But if you want to add your data to the data model, for example, you could do that. And then you get this view here of the blank pivot table. And on the pivot table screen, you have a fields list. You'll have a search box for the fields list. You have 4 quadrants. Down in the lower right there, you'll see you have filters, columns, rows, and values. And then in the on the main sort of left area there, that's where your pivot table is going to appear. And you'll be able to experiment with moving your fields around in those quadrants to create the pivot table. So this right here is the pivot table from scratch. You'll see that we've dropped fields into the columns, rows, and values quadrants. We aren't using the filter quadrant yet. We'll get to that. But we've created a simple pivot table here. And in this pivot table, we have countries, and then we have some order counts as far as what sorts of orders did those countries place over the course of the years of data that we have. Now, the next feature I want to talk about is the recommended pivot table. And this is the button right next to the pivot table. And what this does is it adds a fun feature where Excel will look at your data and recommend about 10 different pivot tables based on what your data looks like. It says, hey, these tables probably are good examples of pivot tables with your data. Now, you don't need to pick one of them. If you want to, you could pick one of the recommended pivot tables and simply tweak it. Your pivot table is not chiseled into stone. When you click recommended pivot table, you can manipulate it just like you can with a pivot table from scratch. So this often saves you a bit of time because while the exact pivot table that you want won't necessarily be in your choices, oftentimes something very close to it will be. And you'll select that pivot table and make those modifications. You'll see here that the wizard for the recommended pivot table does look significantly different than the wizard for the pivot table from scratch. You'll see those recommended pivot tables appear. You'll also note in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see that there's an option for making a new blank pivot table. That's if you don't like any of the recommended pivot tables at all. So now we'll move into pivot table layout and formatting. The first aspect of layout and formatting that I'll talk about is the design ribbon, and this is available for you to change how your pivot table looks. There's a variety of styles, for example, available, and you can either scroll through those or click on a drop-down arrow to get access to the entire style gallery. You may want to add bands to your rows or columns, and just depending on how you want your pivot table to look, you'll be able to make those modifications there in the design ribbon. Conditional formatting is another type of formatting you may want to apply to a pivot table. Now, conditional formatting also can be applied to regular Excel sheets. It is not a feature that is exclusive to PivotTables. It just works very well with them if you want to use it. You'll find conditional formatting located in the Home tab under the Conditional Formatting button, and you'll see there's a variety of different types. There's an icon set, there's a data bar, and you'll see some of those formats applied soon here. This is an example of the wizard for creating conditional formatting. Right here we're using a basic icon set. This is very popular for business KPIs, or key performance indicators. It's a traffic light icon set. You have a red light, a yellow light, and a green light. Green light's good, red light's bad, yellow light's somewhere in the middle, right? So you can select here, and you could choose a percentage, like maybe you want everything above 75% to be green. Or maybe you want to choose some absolute values. You get to pick exactly how you want this icon set to be displayed on your pivot table. You simply click OK, the rule is applied, and the conditional formatting is applied. This is an example of an icon set applied to a pivot table. Right here, I have added a green traffic light icon to all the cells that have numbers that are above 1,000, a red traffic light icon to all of the cells that have a number below 100, and a yellow traffic light icon to all the cells with numbers in between. Another example of conditional formatting is data bars, and this is the wizard for data bars. And you'll see here that you have some options, like maybe you want the color to be a bit transparent, or maybe you want a border, for example, around your data bar. But the basic idea of data bars is that the bar appears in the cell, and the bar is longer depending on the number that it's representing. This is a screenshot of data bars applied. As you can see, 435 is the largest number, and 69 is the smallest number, and the data bar length corresponds to the number. We'll move next into the filtering pivot tables segment. Here's a simple way to filter a pivot table. You can move to a cell. In this case, we're using the intersection of sum of sales amount and medium half finger gloves. We simply double click on that cell, and that produces in another Excel sheet in tabular format all of the data from your original set that have to do with that cell, okay? So that's just one way of filtering, gives you access to all of that data immediately. Another way to filter your data set is to use the filter quadrant. You simply drag and drop one of the fields from your fields list into the filter quadrant. That will apply, as you can see there in the circled area, a filter area on your chart. And you can click on that and choose what you're filtering based on. In this particular example, I've taken a very large data set and filtered it down to just one day. So I've taken, thousands of rows, and I'm just showing you a few of them. It's just that one day's worth of data. That's what a filter does. Right here, you can see you have the option to choose multiple items from your filter. For example, instead of one day, maybe I want to show you a whole week. So I've checked off 5, 6, 7 days here. Another great way to filter your data set, and this is actually a good way to filter your data set in real time, is you use a slicer. And a slicer is a graphic interface that you see appear there on the screen. It's that box, it says country, and you see some of the countries are highlighted there. And this is for presentation in real time. You're in a room and you're showing this data, and your business decision makers are sitting there and they're asking you questions on the data. And they say, well, how about just the data from Germany? And you can very easily then react to that question with a slicer. And what this gets into, honestly, is Excel as a presentation tool. You see a lot of people building PowerPoint decks, and they take a screenshot of an Excel graph, and they'll put it in a PowerPoint slide. And that's great. PowerPoint is great for that. But of course, you can't respond to questions and change that table. You can't change that chart. So in this case, you have Excel also being a great presentation tool. Maybe you do a deck in PowerPoint, and then you move to Excel, show your audience a pivot table, and react to their questions using the slicer. Another way to filter your data set is with the timeline. And the timeline really is a type of slicer. As you can see on the screen here, we've got some months highlighted. You can also highlight quarters or days or years. And instead of clicking on a specific country or a specific time zone or whatever you're clicking on with your slicer, you click on a time on the timeline filter, and that will show you only the data that corresponds to the particular time in that timeline. We'll move on to creating pivot charts next. In Excel, you have a lot of options for creating charts. And what a pivot chart is is it's very much like a regular chart in all respects, other than just like a pivot table. You can pivot a pivot chart. And you'll build a pivot chart a lot of times alongside a pivot table. And when you make the pivots for the table, the chart pivots with it. That said, you can use all the tools that Excel has available to alter the style of the chart. You can add elements like axis labels and stuff using the contextual buttons up at the top right. Your chart functionality is still there. You've just added the capability to pivot. These are the contextual buttons. You want to make the chart darker. Do you want to change the color scheme? Do you want to add a title? Do you want to add axis labels? You use these buttons here. You can also use the Design tab to do this. Right here, there's a variety of styles available from the gallery. Maybe you had a gray background. Maybe you had a darker background. Many times, if you're in a dark room, you want your background to be a little bit darker so you don't have that really high glaring contrast between the white chart and the background. So you can pick a design that works great for whatever your arena of presentation is. And you can also choose different layouts and formats to fit the visual style you want for your chart, just like with regular Excel charts. Here's just some other examples of items you can add and subtract from pivot charts. Axis fields, or axis titles, excuse me, a legend field. Just play around and make your chart look like how you want it. And now we'll move into a demo. So we're going to do a demo of pivot tables here with this data that you see on my screen. And this is the AdventureWorks database, or a pull from the AdventureWorks database, where you have a fake athletic goods company called AdventureWorks selling athletic gear to countries all over the world. So I've got the names of the customer, the country they're from, so on and so forth here. And we're going to go up and make a basic pivot table using this data. So I'll go to my Insert tab, and then I'll move over to my Pivot Table button, and I click this. And what this does is you'll see I just had one cell clicked, and Excel has expanded out and selected all the data I had available. Now, the only time it's not going to do this right is if you have rows or columns of spaces in your data. Excel will stop at those rows or columns of spaces. So you actually will need, at that point here, let me just cancel out of this, you'll need to manually select all the data that you're going to use. We don't need to do that in this case because I have no, as is usually the case, no rows or columns of spaces in my data. So I click Pivot Table. My options here, it asks you, is this the range of data you want? Yes, it is. My best business practice is I make them in new worksheets. Occasionally, you may have need for an existing worksheet, but let's do a new one. We'll click OK, and here we go. This is our blank pivot table. And I think what we'll do here is we'll just, this is my fields list, and if I want to search my fields list, I can do that here. Like, for example, maybe I want to go product, and that'll just show me all the fields that have the word product. We're going to grab country, and see, you just drag it down here, and let's put country into columns, and you can move this. Let's do that so we can see our whole table. Rows is going to be our product category. There we go. And already you can kind of see where we're going here, right? And then for order quantity values, here we go. This is a pivot table. See how easy that was? This is a pivot table of all of the orders for the different types of products we sell from our fake athletic goods company to these different countries, okay? So that's a pivot table. We just made a pivot table. How long did that take? Maybe 30 seconds? I don't know, but it was very easy, as you can see. What if we want to modify it a little bit? Well, let's go grab some more numbers. And as you can see, you're not limited, as you will see, you're not limited to just one field in each of these quadrants. I'm going to drag sales amount down here to values, and that adds values. And you'll see that it's a little bit wrong. A lot of times the default is not quite what you want, and you have to tweak. I don't want the count of sales amount, because the count of the sales amount is simply the order quantity. I want the sum of the sales amount. So I'm going to click this caret. I'm going to go into this value field settings area right here. And I simply say, no, Excel, I want the sum. And this is a currency, so let's also, while we're here, let's kill two birds with one stone and go into number format and make it a currency. That'll add a dollar sign, and it'll limit us to 2 decimal points because no one cares about a thousandth of a penny. And we'll click OK. OK, and there we go. Now I've got my sum of the sales amount in each country alongside the number of orders. That's pretty great. Okay, so see how easy it is to make a pivot table? I'm going to mess up this pivot table really good, just to encourage you to experiment. You can drag and drop whatever you want, wherever you want. grab something else here. And as you can see, this starts to look ridiculous, right? So not all combinations are reasonable, but just to encourage you to experiment, grab your data, save it as something else so you don't accidentally mess it up. Save it as the name of your data and then maybe the word sample after it or something. And then make a pivot table and then just mess with it. And that'll get you comfortable using pivot tables, okay? So I'm going to delete this because it is not useful anymore. And what I'm going to do next is show you the recommended pivot table feature. So once again, we go up to our Insert tab, Recommended Pivot Tables, click. And this wizard is significantly different, right? You've got 10 different pivot tables right here. And what Excel has done is it looks at your data and say, hey, I think you might want to use these tables. You might want one of these. Or you might want a table that's kind of like one of these, okay? So let's pick one. Let's just go, let's see. Sum of sales amount by product category. That looks interesting. If I want a blank one, if I decide I hate all of these Excel, I'm going to go blank pivot table. But we like this one. We like sum of sales amount by product category, and we click OK. And here we go. It's a pivot table. It's already made. But you'll notice this is not chiseled in stone. You have your fields list, you have your fields, you have your quadrants. You can drag fields into the quadrants, okay? You're not restricted in any way when you choose recommended pivot tables. So, you know, quite frankly, a lot of people might just always pick recommended pivot table just to see if one is there that they want to use, okay? So we've got this, and I want to show you a neat little feature here. Excel actually automatically categorizes your data. If I go here, see these little pluses? I'm going to click that for jerseys, and you'll see all of the jerseys can be drilled down into and separated. And you know, the best news about this is you don't even have to do anything. Excel did that for me. And how did it do that? Let me just go back to my data. And you see that I've got this product category, and I've got this product name. And that all of the vests, there's a product category vests, and then all of the vests have a product name. And so long as you know, I have these names within vests, I've got one row that's all the same, or one column that's all the same, and then I've got variations on that. Excel will actually automatically place them into these little drop downs. So that's really cool, okay? Let me show you some other things here. Now that I've shown you how to create pivot tables, let me show you some other stuff you can do with them. And I think what we will do is start with our design ribbon up here. Now, this is contextual. If I go here, you'll notice it's not there, okay? So don't panic. If you look up on your Excel ribbon and you see there's no design tab, don't panic. It only appears when you can use it. And now I'm clicking on a pivot table. Look, I'm not clicking on a pivot table. Now I am, and you see the design tab appears. Let's take a look at it. And right here we have our style gallery. I can scroll through it, or better yet, I can just click this drop down here. And there's a lot of different styles available. You could do light styles. Some of these are really minimal. I kind of prefer the medium styles myself, depending on the type of table you're making. There's dark styles too. Maybe if you're in a darker room and you're presenting up on a screen, you may want to do something like this. And the darker styles are going to have white type instead of black type. Actually, for this particular table, I think I maybe like a lighter style better. Let's go with that. Okay, so now I've changed my style. I can choose if I want banded rows or columns. Like here, this is going to really emphasize the rows. Okay, here I can really emphasize the columns. I don't know that I need to do that for this particular table. I can, right here, I can turn on or off totals, grand totals and subtotals. I can choose some options for my report layout right here. And I can also add some blank rows to my table if I want to. So that's some ways that I can alter my pivot table design. Next up, let's move into conditional formatting. I'm going to expand my socks area right here. Maybe not socks. Let's do jerseys. I'm going to expand jerseys. I'm going to go back to my Home tab now. And I will apply an icon set to this area of the data. And I'm going to say the goal for jersey sales is $1,200 worth of jerseys, and I have a separate salesperson in each category, which of course is unrealistic, but for the purpose of the exercise, it makes sense. And then I can say that you did okay if you sold at least $1,000, but it's failure if you sold less than $1,000 of jerseys. And I want to demonstrate that using conditional formatting. So I go up here to my conditional formatting button. And what I first do is, I always encourage people, go down to Manage Rules, skip this stuff right here. This is shortcuts. Once you get good at it, use the shortcuts. But go to Manage Rules if you're just getting started. It gives you your rules wizard here. I'm going to make a new rule. And we want to choose an icon set. So I select icon set for my options. Here we go. And remember what my rule was? It wasn't percentages, it was numbers. So here we go. Numbers, numbers. And my numbers were 1,200. Anything above 1,200 is great. You did okay if you sold between $1,000 and $1,200 worth of jerseys, and failure for red. Okay, I click OK. Here's my rule. There it is. And as you can see, the icon set is applied. All right? Let's do one more type of conditional formatting. I'm just going to use my back button to get rid of that. And we'll go conditional formatting one more time. Manage rules. I'm going to go new rule. And this time we'll do data bars, okay? There's also color scales as well. But we'll do data bars. I'm just going to use the default data bars and click OK. OK, and once again, here we go. Our $13.99, that's the 72 cents, that's the best. $7.55 was the worst. Okay? Now, you can go wrong with conditional formatting. Let me show you how. I'm just going to expand a few of these options. I promised socks before, so we'll keep socks expanded. And then I'm going to go whole column B here. And I'm going to go back to my conditional formatting. And I will manage my rules. I will select new rule. And we're going to do data bars. And I'm going to show you how you can go wrong with data bars. Ready? OK, OK. And up here, you don't even see any. And you're like, Jason, you said you were going to put data bars on this. And you didn't. But I did, actually. You can't see them. Here I can see. Here I can see. The numbers are big enough. You get the idea? Are you figuring out the pattern by looking at this? Can't see these. Here's the culprit. 9,920,193. That's a huge number. It's so big that when you're using data bars, Excel can't tell the difference between 12,419 and 107. Excel can, rather you can't, because you're looking at it and the visual scale is so off that it doesn't work. So you have to be really careful with your scale when you do data bars. I'm just going to use my back button to get rid of that now. We're going to move into filtering now. And the first method of filtering I'm going to use is I'm going to double click on the intersection of sum of sales amount and long sleeve logo jerseys in the small size. Double click. And what this does, it was kind of hard to see here, but it opened up a new sheet. And on that sheet in tabular format is all the data from my original set. And this looks like a lot of data. It's only 24 rows though. Like if I go back to the original, whoa, it goes on and on forever, right? So this is just a small portion of that data. And really what it did is it scooped up a little bit of data that you're concerned with and showed you it in tabular format. So that's a way of filtering right there. It really is a type of filter. For another filter, let's use the official filter quadrant here. And I will grab the country field and drop it down into the filter quadrant. And as you can see, what that did is made a filter appear up here. And this is where I monkey with it. I click on this and I go select multiple items. Always choose this most of the, well, okay, most always choose this. You don't always need to, but I generally do. And it makes it easier to interface with. And maybe I want, let's say I just want continental Europe, so I'm just going to choose France and Germany. Now watch the chart, and you'll see those numbers changed. They got smaller, and that's because I'm showing you only the numbers I selected. And you can just pick one if you want to. Maybe I want to do, just the UK. Now, this is useful, obviously, but you may run into a circumstance where it's a little bit cumbersome to have to click into here and select these all the time. So what I'm going to do is actually remove this field and show you a different way. I'm going to add a slicer, and we'll do that on our Insert tab. Go up here to the Insert tab, and over here we have the slicer. Slicers are slicers are also available on the Analyze tab, but let's just grab one from here. Slicer, and we'll just continue to filter based upon country. Click OK, and here we go. Here's our slicer. Now, it's the same functionality. It's bigger, it uses more screen real estate, but it's quicker to interact with. So if you're in a circumstance where you need to change your filter frequently and it's worth it to use that extra screen real estate, use a slicer instead of using the filter quadrant. And now you can see, and I'll just rapidly cycle through. And you can use a shift click to select a lot or all. You can use control click to shift onesie twosie to select onesie twosie. Okay. So there we have it. That is how a slicer works. Special kind of slicer called a timeline. Let's insert one of those too. Over to here. It's right next to the slicer. Here's our timeline. Oop. And got to make sure you've highlighted clicked on your pivot table in order for this to work. I just showed you what happened if you don't. We'll click on timeline. And you'll see this was different from the regular slicer. The only thing we can choose here as our option is order date. And that's because timelines only work with time formatted data. And the only time formatted data I have in this data set is the order date. Let's go ahead and select it. Here we go. And I've got 2018 sales. Just scroll back, 2017 sales, 2016 sales. Our default is in months. Maybe I want just February of 2017 in just Australia. Okay, see how I really filtered down this data? All we sold is bikes. In fact, all this company sells to Australia is bikes. They don't sell any jerseys or helmets or anything to Australia. So maybe a more representative country would be Canada. And I can see that I did sell a fairly small amount of other product in February of 2017 to Canada. And you can see how this starts to get really cool looking, okay? In fact, we might even call this some kind of dashboard or presentation area. If you're presenting with Excel, and you can present with Excel, PowerPoint isn't the only program that you can use for presentation. If you really need to manipulate your data, you may want to do your PowerPoint deck and then switch over to Excel and present in Excel. And we want some pictures, then we maybe want a chart. So for the next thing that we'll show here is let's bring a chart then onto this dashboard that we've kind of started to create. So I'll go back to my insert. I'm going to use a pivot chart. Here we go, pivot chart. Now notice that you do also have the option to make a pivot chart and a pivot table at the same time. If you don't have your table yet, that might be a good option. But we've got our table already, so I'm just going to make a pivot chart all by itself. What do I want to do? Now this looks really complex. In fact, it looks too complex. It's messy. You'll see here if I start clicking through these different types of charts, it's ridiculous looking. There's too much stuff on the chart. You run into that sometimes with pivot tables and pivot charts. How do you fix the problem? Well, in order to make your chart look good, sometimes the only thing is to take some of the data off. So let's do that. Let's just take product name out. We've got a smaller table here now, but I just want to show you how charts work, so I think that's worth it for the time being. And let's go back. And we'll click Pivot Chart again. And now you see these charts look good. You really see something demonstrated when you're looking at these. And you can't pick every kind of chart for every kind of data. It just doesn't work that way. But let's go ahead and make a clustered column chart here. And you got some 3D options and stuff too. Let's apply some 3D options just for fun. Click OK. Here's our chart. And I'll keep the chart over the slicer here for the time being just to focus on it. And what right now this chart is demonstrating to us is, wow, our main product is bikes. I mean, we sell so many more bikes. I mean, here, let's take the filters off. See how the chart changes too? Even when we take all the filters off. Let's try different years. Maybe these years, maybe there's some kind of anomaly here. Let's change the years in our timeline. 2016. Oh, we got some more. Oh, these are bikes too, touring bikes. 2018. Oh, nothing here. 2016. Okay, yeah, bikes. You want to try just a day? Watch this, just January 8th. All we sold that day was bikes. Okay, so we sell a lot of bikes. That can be useful business intelligence. something we probably already knew, honestly, because I mean, it's so obvious. So how do we, drill down into this a little bit? Well, let's apply a filter, and there's a filter built right into the chart here that we can use. And let's just take the bikes out. I'm going to unselect mountain bike, unselect road bike, and touring bike, and click OK. And now, now I can see. Remember, it's about scale. When you visualize data, scale is very, very important. Remember those data bars that were just, the scale was so big you couldn't learn anything from them? Likewise, sometimes that happens with your charts. And right here we can learn from this. We could say, well, tires and tubes is really good business, so is helmets. Socks? I don't know, maybe we want to stop selling socks, okay? How about just France? Now it looks like well, they like their helmets in Germany, okay? So I mean, see how you can just shuffle around through these, and we've got a very nice looking dashboard here, okay? So what I want to do is finish off this demo by just making this dashboard look really nice. So I'm going to go away from this. And if you ever want that back, if you ever close the field list, or if you ever accidentally lose it, as sometimes people, they start making pivot tables and then they accidentally lose their field list, go to the Analyze tab and just click Field List. Here it is again, to your rescue, the pivot chart fields list, the pivot table fields list. But I don't want it right now. I'm making a dashboard. So I'm just going to move these around so we can for sure see all of them. You can spend more time moving them around too. Make it look really good. And then another thing that I always like to do when I make a dashboard is I click on just a cell and I go to my View tab. And in my View tab, I hide the grid lines. Now I've got just this white background. And if I want to change some colors, maybe I like this better. Or maybe I want to change the color scheme. And I'm already really into blue and purple, so I think I'm just going to keep my blue color scheme here, but maybe I want the background a little darker, okay? So here's our dashboard. We're presenting in Excel. It looks really cool. And this has been the demo for pivot tables and pivot charts. We're at the end of today's demonstration. I hope this training has been valuable to you. You can visit Microsoft.com/ITshowcase/productivity to view additional live webinars and productivity training on Microsoft products and services. Thank you for joining me.